welcome. I think that the people who came in person only slightly outnumber the people we have on Zoom, which is now at 27 and climbing. They know they can come a little late. I shouldn't have done the waiting. I'm Jim Fisher. I'm the town manager of Deer Isle, which means I'm at the very bottom of a very large pyramid with a lot of bosses on top, and I'm on the bottom. I'm glad you came tonight, though. This is an important discussion, and I will I'll mention briefly, while I admit more people to the meeting, I think they're going to pass us, these virtual attendees. So we'll take just a few minutes in introduction. I wish I could recognize everybody here who's come. There won't be time for that, and I don't know everybody's names. We're going to get a report from Andrew Sankey. He's the head of the Hancock County Emergency Management Agency. And we had an exercise last week talking about what would happen if the causeway blew out in a storm. And what would we do to respond to that? After that, I will we'll have, let's see if I can get this to scroll down. We'll have Linda Nelson and Kathleen Billings talking about some of the economic and social impacts the causeway and really the bridge have on our lives and how important those are for maintaining our economy and essential services. Hopefully most of the meeting will be a discussion where you can participate too and raise your issues, concerns, ideas. I know there are a lot. And we're going to conclude with some feedback from some of the officials who have come. And I'd really like to thank them for coming. I don't know if I can pull this up. Hopefully or not. I think so. Interesting. You probably have to admit people, but they won't be admitted. So I want to thank particularly Andy Sankey and the Maine and Hancock County Emergency Management Agency for taking the time to really focus on the causeway. It's a huge vulnerability. We know with sea level rise and increasing storm activity, it's not going to be a rare couple times a year problem where it floods over, but it could become a monthly issue at the highest tide of each month. And then it could become almost a daily issue if the sea levels rise as predicted. I want to thank Bill Doughty for coming, representing the Maine Department of Transportation. And we have a number of local elected leaders or representatives of leaders. And I think I'd like to go quickly around and have them introduce themselves because I'll get your names wrong. I see Zach in the corner.
Zach Smesher, District Representative for Congressman Golden.
And we have someone from King's office, I believe.
I am Christina Breen. I'm a regional representative for Maine.
Thank you. Any other representatives? I know we have an elected representative here. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Nicole Grahowski, State Senator for most of Hancock County.
Good. Am I missing anyone? Okay, and we have a slew of select board members and others, so I think they'll have a chance to talk and maybe introduce themselves at the time. So,
Jim, I'll just point out that Carol Woodcock is online from Senator Collins' office.
Thank you, Alan. Cool, huh? Okay, well, without taking any more time, I think the most important people here are you. Remember, we're kind of at the bottom of this pyramid. You guys are at the top, and your concerns are our concerns. So when you have a chance, I hope you will speak out and talk about things you think about when you consider the importance of our transportation infrastructure, particularly in light of the bigger storms and sea level rise. I've got to admit, 6 more than this my whole introduction. So without further ado, Andy, if you want to come forward and talk a little bit about what we did last week, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
You can use these microphones, or you have a big voice.
Hopefully, can everyone hear me okay?
Oh,
Yeah. All right, great. For the folks online, I apologize for the back of my head. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for the turnout. I think it's wonderful, and I'm delighted we have so many folks here tonight to hear and speak about this issue. If anyone has any questions at any point, please interrupt or stick around. I'd be happy to speak with you regarding any emergency management components to this. Chief Carter is here tonight, who was part of our exercise last week. And what transpired last week was we conducted a tabletop exercise. Has anyone here ever participated in a tabletop exercise? Okay, well, a couple of people. It's a discussion-based gathering. And we literally sat here, a big square last week, a big rectangle, and it was all the elected, appointed, and public safety officials from the region. So Sedgwick, Deer Isle, and Stonington folks were represented, along with Hancock County folks, and we even had folks from the state participate, and federal representation as well. So it was really quite wonderful. It was law, fire, and EMS primarily. The ambulance service was here, Walter Reed representing Memorial Ambulance, and we had all the right people, which made it wonderful, and we wound up having 30 people participate in that. So it was really good turnout. Some of the outcomes that we identified from the scenario, and the scenario was one that we relied on the Weather Service office in Caribou, which has forecast responsibility for this community. We asked them to put together a forecast for us on what would be a storm event that's very realistic, that has happened in the past, that could happen again in the future, that might pose some tidal consequences, rainfall consequences, winds that would force a closure of the causeway. We don't just mean high water, but actually the causeway disappeared, part of it. And we had in our scenario a 30 by 30 by 3 foot deep hole, sort of right in the middle of the causeway. And what would the consequences for something like that happening? Now, I don't want to scare anyone, okay? Is that a potential that something like that may happen? Absolutely, very much so. Who has had to wait until the causeway's been cleared to see weed and rocks after a high tide or a storm? Right? How often does that happen? Every 12 hours, a couple days a month sometimes, right? It depends on the tide, it depends on the moon, right? It depends which way the wind is blowing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be catastrophic event, like a 30 by 30 by 3 foot deep hole happening, or part of it washing out into the ocean. It could just be a really bad storm that puts so much debris on there, or something happens with the guardrails or whatever it might be, that shuts down the causeway for a while. And what are the consequences to the populations of these communities if the causeway were commissioned for, let's say 48 to 72 hours? What would happen? Right? Consequences for schools, business, right? Individuals. Think about the medical needs of people. The one I turn to is, how about anyone here know someone who's a dialysis patient that has to go to Ellsworth? Okay. What if that person lives in Stonington, I'll say, and they can't get across the causeway to get that dialysis up in Ellsworth? What are the consequences for them? So that's really what the exercise was about. It was a lot of what ifs, not necessarily worst case scenarios, but realistic challenges that we would be confronted with to find out what the public safety response was. And for the most part, I think we identified and recognized and realized that it would get fixed, right? It might take a couple days longer than we would hope, but it would get fixed, and each of the agencies, each of the public safety agencies have personnel and plans on workarounds. Certainly the fire service has plans on people and where they're going to locate equipment, either before the storm or after the storm, or get equipment across, or personnel across, or fuel, or medicines, or food, or evacuate people off, or whatever it might be. So those plans exist, they're in place. Will they work? Well, I guess we're not really sure, are we? One of the reasons we do these types of exercises is to identify where we fail, what may go wrong, not to celebrate our successes. How good are we at talking about what it is that we know we're going to fail at? Who likes to do that? No one, right? So we want to make sure that we have a very realistic view of what the realities may be for us should we be confronted with the circumstance of the causeway. When I'm speaking of the causeway and the group was speaking of the causeway, we're also really considering and thinking about the bridge as well, right? So sir.
Did you talk about the Sunshine Causeway as well?
We did not. No, we did not. But that is certainly in the town's plans. And you speak with Chief Morey, he's certainly cognizant of that, and he plans all the time for that type of scenario if part of town is actually physically separated due to infrastructure, road infrastructure failure or something else like that. So, the Causeway is number one. It's at the top of the list of our risks here in Hancock County. I've been with the agency for going on 12 years now, and it remains number one risk. We are putting together a natural hazard mitigation plan that the federal government eventually signs off on for us for the entirety of Hancock County. And in that plan, the number one rated risk every 5-year cycle that I've done it, this will be my 4th coming up, will be the Causeway. So why do I do that? Hopefully to get the attention. And whose attention want to get? Well, all of yours, and we certainly have that tonight, right? But also our elected folks. Right? Because to fix this and to really solve it, it's going to require what?
Money.
Right. And is everyone familiar with that process, right? How we get that type of money? So that's really why we're here tonight. But my agency can really only speak to the public safety components of it. That's what we wanted to address, what the challenges will be for our public safety officials and agencies, local, county, state, federal, who are going to be tasked with, 1, preventing the problem, 2, dealing with the problem if it were to occur, and making sure that we preserve as many lives and properties as we possibly, in the environment in that order, as we possibly can. Any questions? Thank you. I have a clipboard going around. I'm going to ask you to please register your name on there. It's for no other purpose than for my agency to get credit that we conducted this session for you tonight. So, all right, I appreciate your signing in. If there's no other questions, I'm going to stick around. I live over on Scudic. I live in Gouldsboro, the other end of the county. And you might recall a couple of years ago, there was a big storm on June 9th. And what happened? A section of roadway in Prospect Harbor washed out, right? Was it a huge inconvenience and was it very expensive to fix? Yes. Was it life-threatening? No, because there was a detour, a very long, but there was another way around. That very same storm, community in Washington County, Roque Bluffs, experienced an infrastructure failure when the road there washed out, the state road, much like Route 15, right? Just disappeared in a heavy rainstorm. Right? It took weeks and weeks and weeks to get it repaired. Everyone responsible did an outstanding job. Everyone rose to the occasion. So that's sort of in the back of my mind. I know that the type of response that we would see from our fellow agencies and partners at the state and federal level to fix something like that. Who's footing the bill for it? That's not I can't speak to that, right? We have some other folks that are going to be part of the presentation tonight that will speak to some of these things. With that, I'll say thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andy. Next, I don't know, I think Linda, you're speaking now? Linda, you know, I'm used to people coming in with 50 PowerPoint slides, and Linda has one, which I will share with you, and the people on Zoom.
Well, I don't think anybody on Zoom or in this room needs to be convinced of the importance of the causeway, which is why there's one slide. So I'm currently the Economic and Community Development Director for the town of Stonington. And the reason that this process with Andy Sankey was so important to us is because we know we have 2 single points of failure, the causeway and the bridge. So I just want to start with a little bit of history, right? The bridge opened in 1939. There are many stories about the bridge, but one of the best is that it was really businessmen who were fighting for the bridge because the car was on the ascendancy, right, in terms of transportation. So all of that granite and all of that fish that used to go out of Stonington by boat across the water, more and more didn't have that access, not to mention the people and the tourists. And so without a bridge, the island was becoming more and more isolated. And the businessmen in particular recognized this and started to work for the funding. And what, as Andy Sankey said, sometimes that funding is a piece that takes years and years and years to come across, right? So we wanted to make sure that this process is really launched during a time when there is money from the infrastructure bill, right? So that the fact that we're the biggest risk factor in Hancock County will also mean that we're at the top of the list for some of those infrastructure funds so that we can do some mitigation and manage the risks that climate change are causing to that causeway. all right? So sea level rise, increased storms, increased wind, all these things. So we've had problems with the causeway for years, and now it's much more vulnerable. So what is also much more vulnerable is our economy. And I talk about economy and community in the same breath almost, because they're very much parallel and much the same, right? So with the bridge, it opened in 1939. It was built in 2 years. It was built super fast. It took 10 years before that to get the funding for it. The long part of building that bridge was getting the funding for it. Once the funding was there, bridge went up really fast. So we just need to consider that when we think about the breaks to our economy or the breaks to our community when something happens. Like Andy said, you have a 30 by 30 by 3 foot hole. Maine Department of Transportation idealistically says it can be fixed maybe in 2 weeks. We know that's 4 weeks. We've all been driving around road construction, right? So anyway, so we think about what is the impact if that happens, right? Obviously, it has a huge social impact on all of us because our communication lines run across there, our power lines run across there, everything runs across there. It's not just people and stuff. And you know, what we know about our economy, we all know about our economy, $55 million a year in lobsters. These are live creatures that are dying from the minute that they come out of the water. So the timely transportation of lobster from Stonington to where it's going is hugely, hugely important. And those of us who were here during 9/11 and the stoppages that happened during 9/11 really experienced that, right? With lobsters being backed up and losing not only value, but losing lobsters, right? So, and we know all the pressure our fishing industry is under right now, and that's not the reason that we're here tonight, but so $55 million in lobster. And then we're lucky here because we have a somewhat diversified economy. Obviously, it's not diversified enough, but in addition to lobster, that causeway is responsible for all the construction and tradespeople. That includes the Cratch Island Quarry, which remains an active quarry and ships blocks of 2 to 3 tons over on flatbed trucks back and forth across the causeway and the bridge on a regular basis. That includes the fact that our tradespeople, many of whom I talked with today, say that more than 50% of their staff come from across the bridge now. So that's a two-way street, right? That point of failure is a two-way street for our economy. It's about the resources we have available to us, and it's about how we get our resources off. You know, tourism, outdoor recreation, and the creative economy, bigger all the time. We're trying to balance it appropriately. But I got to talk to Garrett today at the Idaho Boat Company, because that's also, we're the point for Acadia National Park out on Idaho. And they've transported 10,000 non-resident passengers in 2021. That's 10,000 people going from Stonington that have to get to and from Stonington and are spending their money at the boat company in town. And then the trucks and traffic. I talked to people at Island Employees Cooperative and Barter Lumber. You know, we're trying to estimate. Evelyn did a study several years ago, the total number of huge trucks that come across in both directions again on a regular basis. We have 7 lobster buying ports, you know, so there's 7 places where 18-wheelers are coming with lobsters going off. And then these places, Barters, IEC, they're getting 8 to 10 trucks a week of supplies back. And probably the most vulnerable thing, and I don't think Joe's here tonight, and I talked to Tony too, is our fuel supply, right? So at our last meeting when we did the tabletop exercise, Joe Brown was saying they have, you know, storage for maybe 2 weeks of fuel oil, right? And if you get to the 2-week mark, you start to really endanger your ability to have enough fuel on the island. And I also included there, just for everybody to think about, so because we've got this $55 million fishery, and that's an average over 5 years. 2021 was a huge boon year for the fishery, as any of you involved know. But I averaged it over 5 years, and that's the average. It means that our median household income here is very comparable to Hancock County and the entire state. Our median household income is about $55,200. And that's because of the value of the economy that is fed by that bridge and that causeway, okay? That's what creates that number. And finally, the reason our median age is important is because it also speaks to the impact of healthcare services on our island. Our island is on average 10 years older than the rest of Hancock County, and 25% older than the rest of Maine on average. We have an aging population. The number of people that have to go off on a regular basis for dialysis, the way our healthcare services have moved off island to Blue Hill and even mostly to Ellsworth at this point and Bangor, means that we have a lot of people who are dependent on going that way and coming back across that causeway and across the bridge. And that is all part of the economic and community impact that this has on us. And I'm happy when we get into discussion to answer any other questions. We don't have great economic data for a lot of our stuff. We have lobster landings and lobster value, and we're going to try and start to work on assessing more some of the economic data for some of these other things, because we have generalities but not specifics. And as Jim said to begin with, the important part of tonight is the discussion from you all. So thank you for listening.
Well, with that, I guess we'll open it up to conversation. And I think if you can use a stentorian voice and broadcast well, you can probably speak from where you are. If you have a difficult time speaking loudly, we have a microphone here as well. Would anybody like to lead off? And give us your name also.
Yeah, Linda Allen. I'm just curious, is there a plan of remediation of what to do with the causeway? Is there something in the works that's being considered?
Well, Dale, would you field that?
I'd be happy to. A couple things, and I wasn't at the tabletop exercise. I used to, remember me and Kathleen a number of years ago, I used to be the region manager here. You know, I know Steve gave an estimate of 2 weeks, but depending on what else is going on in the state, you know, the first effort is to get passage through, whether it's one way or not. So could be 2 weeks, could be less than that. So those are, we've had a whole series of those. You know, climate change affects every area of the state, mountains just as much as the coast in a different way, right? So we're getting roads blowing out like the one Jim mentioned, and one of my hometowns, Gouldsboro as well. You know, those are happening everywhere. So we try to stay poised to get to those as quick as we can. This certainly, with the only way in, only way out, would garner a great deal of statewide attention. So we do everything we can to get it back in place, at least get emergency vehicles and one-way alternating traffic back. So that's one thing. The second thing, we kicked off about last year, and I think it's going in earnest, really looking at the causeway to look at, somebody mentioned IAJ a few moments ago, or BIL, whatever you want to call it, the new infrastructure bill. So we started doing an evaluation of the causeway for stability, for geotechnical, for if we were to mitigate the causeway, what would the environmental impacts be, and how would we get that permitted? Our hope is to have that done in spring or summer of next year. So getting set up for the next round of notice of funding that comes out of USDOT and those kind of things. So we hopefully get to that. What are the solutions, what are the solution options by next year, and then try to start figuring out what's the best program, working with our delegation and others to see how we get that funded. So DOT is evaluating. You'll probably see drill crews out there. You'll see people out there doing work. That's the intent of that work, is to try to get to a place to figure out what that solution is, not only for the issue that's been going on today. It's going on when I was region manager. I remember getting CB'd off the causeway, but also into the future, as someone described, that accelerating the more frequency that's likely to happen. So I hope that answered your question. We are doing the engineering studies right now to see what the solution should be, and then how do we get funded.
Is it both state and federal money involved, or just state money?
Please give your name when you ask the question.
I'm Pete March. I live in Sunset.
Hi, Pete. So it would be both. What we'd be looking for is both state and federal. So we would be looking for a federal grant flowing through DOT. We do those all over the state. We just did one in Eastern Washington County. It might be through RAISE. It could be through. There's a number of different programs that we would tap. That requires a state match. So we find it. We write the grant. Work with the town to write the grant, because a lot of it gets to what are the implications, because they're competitive grants in Washington. So we want to describe all the stuff, the economic stuff that we just talked about, and the human scale stuff. So long answer for a short
Yeah,
question, I'm
and
sorry.
I want to remind everyone, this is a conversation, and Dale's a great resource, but feel free to ask other questions
Yeah.
of other people. Yep, go ahead.
My
Your
name is
name?
Robert Fair. I live in Stonington. One of the things that occurs to me that hadn't, when we talked about mitigation, it seems the elevation rise, the topographical rise on each end, including both ends of the bridge, would support the notion of raising the causeway end to end, not just patching and fixing. And I didn't hear any specificity about that, but I read in the Working Waterfront over a year ago that there's $17 billion in infrastructure that the state had identified in need of repair over a year ago in the Working Waterfront. So I understand we're probably in a competitive position for that, but it would seem that the overall drive should be to elevate the causeway and not just do patching of it.
So that's the alternatives we're talking about, things like that, raising the causeway, protecting the causeway, doing it in such a way we're not causing the environmental damage, doing it in such a way that, you know, if you raise it, build on top of what's there, can you do that? Is the stability there?
Exactly.
There's just a lot of engineering questions need to be answered, but probably ultimately that's probably the kind of solution that it would require, yes. I'm not the engineer, she didn't come with me tonight, but those are the things she'll be looking at.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Holly Eaton. I live in Deer Isle. And it may be for you, but it could be an in general question. I'm wondering, so in this scenario, if it's the causeway, then you've addressed some of how you would answer that. But what if it's the bridge? Is that also incorporated in what you'd be looking for in this
So this
infrastructure
engineering
bill?
effort right here is the causeway.
Right.
We continue on a biennial basis to inspect the bridge. I know Kathleen's called me back when I was region manager quite often, oh, you're up on the bridge, is there something wrong? We view that bridge and the causeway attaching the bridge, we call them forever bridges, and nothing's forever. We all know that. I like to think I am, but probably not. But I treat myself as a forever person, although not always. But you know, try to do what you can to keep the health of that bridge. There are, I forget how many in the state, but there's probably 6 or 8 in the state that we spend extra vigilance on maintaining, operating, because we know, number one, what it means to this community, for everything you guys just said, everything Andrew Sankey's been through over the number of years. We also know what the cost would be to replace that bridge and allow marine traffic and other things. And then finally, what the disruption would be. You know, you think about building a bridge and putting in a temporary bridge next to it, or keeping that one and building the next one and connecting. Those are all going to have implications. So the most prudent thing is really pay attention to the bridge, pay attention to the short causeway, I guess, is Deer Isle Sedgwick Causeway, and really try to keep that good forever. But be anticipating the time when it does need to be replaced or does need to be upgraded. So our immediate focus is where the immediate concern is, but we're always paying attention to that bridge. We're probably on that bridge as much as any other bridge in the state for all those reasons.
I had a follow-up question, and it would be, so from last week's conversation, were there other suggestions that this group should hear about? Like, I think if we were in this situation, should we already have ferry terminals in place so that we could get people on and off the island?
I think yes, we certainly, we didn't go very far. This was an emergency scenario and how quickly we could restore the causeway. But there was discussion of whether you could transport people by stretcher across that gap to get them from one ambulance to another, and what would be entailed in that. The longer, because the causeway would be repaired within a relatively short time, ferry service really didn't come up. It was just a matter of getting to Little Deer Island across the bridge. On the other hand, if the bridge itself went out, then we're looking at a much longer stretch, maybe a year or more, without car access. And that's a much more daunting situation. And we don't have good deep water access on the Deer Isle end of things. And so it would be a challenge.
Jim, do you mind if I hold that?
Yeah, please.
So the towns have those types of contingency plans in place to some extent. I said the town has those types of contingency plans in place. The towns do. But what is the practical chance of carrying out those types of plans, right? So one of the questions I get frequently, just as an example, you spoke about ferry terminals, right? People say, well, you have this type of emergency, bring the Swans Island ferry over, and let's use that. But that's not really a solution, because that ferry only goes to French Borough and Swans Island and Bass Harbor, right? So that's just not a viable solution for us. So we have to find those alternatives. And that was part of what we identified and addressed last week, were those types of deficiencies that need to be followed up. The fuller answer, and what I'd really like to share with all of you tonight, though, is ultimately what the message can be from me and my office and all of our folks is individual preparedness. Everyone in the room, everyone here, everyone in these communities needs to plan and prepare based on their own personal circumstances. So if you have an at-risk person in your household that you're responsible for, you need to think and have plans on how you're going to respond and react and be prepared with medicines for yourself, medicines for your pets, medicines for livestock. Is there livestock in these communities? Yes, right? How would we deal with those challenges in an emergency? So is government the solution to those types of things in a time of emergency? Well, maybe eventually, but in reality, no, probably not. So it's up to the individuals to plan and prepare accordingly. And that's ultimately the message that I'm going to share with everyone. And we've got some media people here tonight, and that's the message that we always share with the media is we want people to plan and prepare. Please, I think we all know we've got potential for a very rough winter coming up, right? So there's a great example. We're speaking about that all the time now. We're trying to make sure that people are prepared, that they're safe and they have adequate fuel and things like that for the coming winter, let alone for a catastrophic issue if, let's say, Deer Isle and Stonington were cut off. So, thank you.
Kathleen Billings, Town Manager for the Town of Stonington. One thing I'd like to reiterate out of this is, you know, and I hear Holly's question, but the only thing is, ferries and ferry terminals are not the answer to what we need. I mean, I can't tell you how many tanker trucks of diesel fuel comes for lobster boats, and even for us, for ourselves this year. I mean, we were hauling water in down to Stonington. That tractor trailer unit hauled 7,200 gallons, and we were making 4 trips a day to keep the standpipe. So ferry terminals and stuff like that, maybe for small things, but the amount of cargo, lobsters, diesel fuel for boats and trucks and everything else that we need. And this is why I really feel it's imperative to work with DOT and our congressional delegation and everybody else. It is better off for us to be proactive, get the causeway shored up as best as we can, take the bridge off the forever list, and put it in a slot to get funding for it, because at some point, it's gonna sway, and we're gonna have problems, and the biggest kick in the ass we will have is the weight limit for it. And if we have weight limits on that bridge, we're dead in the water. Simple as that.
Please, in back.
Yes, my name is Julie Eaton. I live in Deer Isle. I'm a lobsterman from Stonington. And I came a little late, so I want to address the point that was made by Holly Eaton about, you know, what do we do if we have to have a medical emergency and we can't use the causeway? Well, we're lucky we have a bridge, but we can't use the causeway, we can't get to the bridge. So you have to look at all the other islands. We're not alone in this. And how do they handle this? I lived on Vinyl Haven for 10 years. And believe me, there are medical emergencies out there. And the ferry doesn't run, or the ferry's in Rockland, and they don't happen to have a ferry on Vinyl Haven that night. There is no fisherman here. We are a fishing community. There isn't a fisherman here who wouldn't take anybody across on a gurney, meet the ambulance at Brooklyn Boatyard, where you have access, and take them to the hospital. There isn't a fisherman here who anytime, day or night, wouldn't do that. I'm one of those fishermen. I just wanted to throw that out. We are a fishing community. For the people that may be here, that are new to our community, You know, this is how our community operates. We all stand together. So if there is a medical emergency, we have options. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Good job.
Okay, sure. Your name?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, you go.
I just want to say,
Your name?
Mike, Walter Kamiga.
Thank you.
So I live in Little Deer Isle. I work in Sunshine, Days Tech School. The Sunshine, what is my understanding is that the state used to be responsible for the Sunshine Causeway, and at some point, decades ago, kind of relinquished that responsibility. So is it all up to the town? Would DOT, if there was an emergency that washed out the Sunshine Causeway, but not the Deer Isle Causeway, would DOT help get that back in operation?
I can't speak for DOT, but Dale will remember that there have been different times in the past when the state has decided they have too many state roads. And they have offered to upgrade roads to get them up to current standards and give them back to the town. And as an incentive, we have what's called the LRAP, the Local Road Assistance Program, and they give us a small, I don't know what it is this year, 30,000 or something, to help maintain our local roads. So Eggemogan Reach and Sunshine were at one point state aid roads, now they're not. But we get this general assistance based on our population, I think. But I don't know in an emergency if the state would come to bat for us or not. Dale would have to answer
My name,
that.
I can't talk and chew gum at the same time.
Spit the gum out.
Yeah, and I'm not in maintenance. I haven't been in maintenance for 5 or 6 years, but I used to head up maintenance, and many times it really is going to depend on what's going on in the region. I mean, if it's a hurricane and there are major roads out all over the place, like the regular, like the Little Deer Isle Causeway, we're going to focus on those. But many times there are times where we assist the town, we write an MOA with Jim to somehow help you out. If we're getting these little microbursts now, right? So a lot of times it's one place, and we help out towns from time to time, and they help out us. So we're Mainers, right? It's really going to just depend on how widespread that event is and what everybody's doing at that moment in time.
Are there any other questions? Sure.
One solution would be to hatch a plan with the U.S. military to provide one of their portable bridges, which they have in abundance for emergency use and in war. We hope we don't ever have to use one in war. They could lay an emergency bridge from the mainland to Little Deer in probably 2 days, maybe 1 day, if it was absolutely necessary.
Good point. I know DOT has some shorter temporary bridges for a causeway failure. I don't know if you have anything that would go the
Yeah,
reach.
more the causeway failure, but,
Right.
but there's something called the EMAC. I think Jim will talk to you about that someday. Years ago, not that many years ago, Vermont had Irene, right, and blew out everything into the sun. There was National Guard from Maine. There was DOT sent 70 trucks over there. When those things happen that are catastrophic like that, Maine Emergency Management and through your county management have access to things like that. So I'm sure Jim will talk to you more about that as time goes on. We'll say it by Jim, so you can hit me if I say about that.
So, sure.
Robert Farrar again. Once we're able to quantify the economic contribution of tourism and out-of-towners coming in during the summer, 10,000 people just using Isle of Ferry is quite impressive. But if you think about the totality of it, if we can quantify that, that also contributes beyond just Deer Isle and the town of Stonington to tax base and revenue. Does that help us get priority for the causeway by being able to show the more?
Oh, absolutely. And DOT recognizes that. There's a process of setting priorities for road repairs and road reconstruction. And it takes into account a number of things, an arterial or a major collector road in this case. They recognize that there's a statewide and regional significance. It's not merely a locally important road. And accordingly, the state will contribute to repairs, sometimes the lion's share of the cost. But again, Dale could talk about that. I used to be very involved in road prioritization with DOT, but I think the process has changed in the 15 years I've been away.
Yeah, and I've only heard part of the question. We dropped that stuff just as he spoke, but yeah, there's a process. That's how Jim and I met, was through that process many years ago. Yeah, there's a process, but I think the infrastructure bill has changed a little bit of that. DOT, as like most towns, have been, Commissioner calls it MacGyver mode. We've all been patching and maintaining and kind of holding stuff together, right? That's just the funding that's been available to us. Some of the grant programs have offered us an opportunity, and that's, again, why we kicked off this engineering study. It's offering an opportunity for us to do stuff that's transformative or stuff that's been lagging behind. So some of the stuff that's been at the back, just because we've been put Band-Aid on things, we've kind of jumped to the front. And that's why we're doing what we're doing this winter. But regional and state, all the things Jim mentioned are important. Only way in and only way out, that's important. That goes
Onward connection to Idaho, another bonus point. It's all about building up points for different things. And then if you rise to the top, and being a major lobster landing port is a very significant economic, statewide economic impact. And so it gets more points.
If we get to the grant place, this is really important, and this gets to your data and stuff like that. We just did one of these for Sanford, an old mill town, right? What the town can help us with, what does it mean to the community? What would it mean if it wasn't done? What's the improvements? What are the benefits to economically disadvantaged, or the only economy, or public safety? Those are things that we'll try to describe, but that's really, we'll be working, when we get to that point, we'll be working through Jim and working through many of you to pull that together so we can write a good competitive grant. So just be thinking about those things as you already are, and we'll be leaning on you for that kind of competitive part of the process.
Craig Hutchinson, Stonington. I just want to reiterate Kathleen Dillon's comment. I think she has it right here. In the short term, there's absolutely no question, going to Julie's point, that we can handle the short-term stuff. And I think where we are in terms of the causeway, in terms of the bridge, we've got old infrastructure there. Our major industry is under siege at this point, and I think it's very important. And I want to thank the members of the staff from the federal delegation being here, Senator Verhofstadt, Representative Eaton, I hope. I think we need to get on the list. We need to have a plan, and I think the engineering folks, I think it sounds to me like are on our side on this. They understand the importance and so forth. But I think it's very important to make sure that we're on the screen of our state government and our federal government, because it's important, and obviously to us. But I think it's also important to them as well. We're a sort of a critical cog in the socioeconomic picture of certainly this state. And I'd like to think broader than that. I think our involvement in tourism probably bears that out. But I appreciate Kathleen's comments, and I think we need to be in the big picture on this thing, and we need to be making some noise. My thoughts.
I understand Dan Ross, our new superintendent, is prepared to say something via Zoom. So Dan, if you want to unmute, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Jim. I thank you for the invitation to coming out. I know I'm a newbie here, but I'll try to give the 2.5 month perspective on this. So I mean, if we're just talking about some hiccups for schools, obviously, depending on the time of day that such a disaster would happen, we'd have kids that were cut off from families. We have some Deer Isle kids that either through superintendent's agreements or other agreements that attend both Brooklyn and Sedgwick, and vice versa. We have Brooklyn and Sedgwick kids that attend here. So, if we're cut off there, that's a huge problem. If they're cut off, we got to make sure that they have their medication, food, clothing, basic necessities, basically. We also have staff that come in from the mainland. I'm one of them. So, we may be in a position, we've hired so many new staff, a lot of them are from outside Deer Isle, Stonington. If that causeway is down, it may be very difficult for us to deliver instruction. We also have contracted services personnel, people that come in to offer additional counseling services, occupational therapy, speech services, that wouldn't have access or stuck isn't the right word, but basically wouldn't be able to get back to the mainland. We have about 22 kids that go up to Ellsworth for the tech school program. Wouldn't be able to get back, or if it happened during the night, wouldn't be able to access their program over there. Obviously, emergency access, where a staff member have fairly significant health emergency, how do we get them off to the hospital? I'm not exactly sure how the causeway affects electricity, but obviously if there's an impact there, it'd be very difficult to offer instruction. So that's kind of what I got. I don't know if people have other questions, but thank you for the opportunity to chime in.
Are there any questions for Dan while he's highlighting? Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Any other questions or points? Okay, I guess let's.
Ned Hill, Deer Isle. How much warning do you have of the possibility of a storm coming that's significant? And what pre-storm activities would you be engaged in?
Andy? I call Andy, he says, you're on your own.
Typically, the Caribou Weather Service office is very engaged with us. Typically 3 to 4 days out before any significant weather event. And the state, and federal, and county and local officials begin planning at that point. And we're briefed every day up until the day of the storm, and then after the storm sometimes as well.
So would you be shutting down things in anticipation of the storm hitting? Could you?
We don't have that authority. If it became apparent, for instance, that wind speeds were unsafe for travel over the bridge, then the bridge would be closed. Yes, it would block the traffic. And that's happened historically, I think, over the years. And we had an exceptional tide weather event whereby we knew the causeway was going to be overwashed. We would make sure that there's no vehicular or pedestrian traffic trying to get across the causeway.
So typically your local public works and DOT would be on site because of those preemptive meetings to know when to close. When I was region manager of Bangor, I remember closing the bridge twice. But we had people out here watching the bridge, watching high profile tracks. So there are people paying attention at that point.
Yeah, we had someone back here who also.
I'm interested in I know we have an undersea buried electrical feed that comes in near the old ferry landing. Is that backed up with a feed on the bridge? Or are there two different main electrical feeds for the island, is what I'm asking?
There are two feeds, one that goes through conduit under the bridge, and this is true for fiber optic as well. There are two feeds, and the other being a cable that comes out of the old ferry landing.
Right.
We're not entirely sure if the feeds under the bridge are functional right now.
Oh, really?
Jim, I can't answer that.
Okay.
They are there, they're present, but they're de-energized.
Okay.
But they are grounded. And it's undersea cable that feeds the, that came from Dorset this morning.
The challenge with the bridge is because it moves so much, the conduit moves quite a bit. And I don't know, maybe my first year I remember seeing a piece of fiber optic just dangling off the side of the broken conduit was dangling from the cable itself. So I think Kathleen pointed out in our exercise that probably as much as electricity, we would miss broadband. That's become a lifeline for many of us. And we would be beside ourselves if we lost that. And so we have to look at both. And if we lose power, we'll probably lose broadband too, but sometimes we'll lose broadband and not power, and we'll still be forlorn.
Well, Spectrum still goes across the bridge, right?
Yeah, their fiber does.
CCIs on the cable.
That's what I think, yeah.
Has anyone got any questions on the chat?
I've texted them saying they can text or ask questions. I guess you can hear me on chat, so if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I'll recognize you. In the meantime, I think we have someone in front here.
Yeah, my voice don't carry real well. Yeah, I'm Marston Brewer. I'm a commercial fisherman, and I also grow scallops. We catch our larvae before it hits bottom. When the scallop spawns, the larvae spends 38 days in the water column. During that time, it's not a swimmer. Okay, they control its buoyancy up and down, but it's not a swimmer. You rely on the eastern Maine coastal current to deliver that larvae first. They call it the larval superhighway. While we're looking at the bridge, it sounds like the causeway, it sounds like it's going to come up some. A good thing. Hopefully they'll get it a little wider, so maybe 2 trailer trucks and a bicycle can pass. That's all good, and there's engineers to do all that stuff. Funding's always an issue. So I want to talk about the environmental effects of leaving that causeway in place. Some will say opening it up is changing it, but no, it got changed when they blocked it off. That water flow through there is important on delivering larvae into the other side by Coney Island and down through. Some will say that, it's just going to go up around the head of the island and down, but the coming tide don't run down. Okay, and we did 20 years or so ago, there was a proposal for a salmon farm up off where Rob McCloskey's Island is. And a bunch of residents got together and they had Neil Pettigrew do a drifter study to see what the currents were up there. And what we found out is the drifters, this was in the fall, the drifters just kind of stayed back there between the pool and that passageway through there. They went back and forth till finally a northwest wind blew them down the bay. Okay, you got no flow coming into that. Opening up that deep end of towards the little Deer Isle shore, opening up that deep end of it would provide that opportunity. So I'm on the board of directors at MCCF too, and one of the things we're always looking for is ways to make it better for the fishing community, and more product makes it better for everyone. So, while you're looking at it, don't miss the opportunity to do some remediation on the environmental damage. Now, someone's probably going to jump up and say it's going to destroy the eelgrass and it's going to destroy the clamming. Okay, but the bottom line is if you look at the Oceanville Bridge, where it's a constricted body of water, you can find eelgrass on one side of it and clams on the other. Okay, so it's important. While we got this opportunity, it's only going to come along once in a lifetime. to take advantage of it. And funding's always an issue. This would, I had some people from nowhere out on the boat today. And one of them was a lady that deals with habitat. And when I was talking to her about this tonight and explaining it to her, she said that bridge would qualify as a environmental remediation. Okay, so that could be tied into part of the funding for doing this, which is an overwhelming issue. So it's an opportunity to straighten stuff out. And I sure hope we don't miss it.
Okay, I'd like to recognize, thank you, Jim Chesney, who's been waiting on Zoom to speak. Jim, go ahead.
I want to echo Marsden's comments, especially regarding funding for climate change resiliency and the availability of funding for ecologically based solutions. One of the things that NOAA is doing is looking for projects, of which I think the Causeway would be a major possibility, to fund projects that will change the way we address coastal resiliency. And one of the big problems in constructing bridges apparently is concrete, because concrete is very the manufacture of concrete is takes a lot of carbon dioxide, so it's ecologically less desirable. And looking back at the history of Deer Isle, of course, the granite industry was put out of business by the development of concrete. So we have a chance, I think, with the Causeway project to reverse the historical pattern and look at using something like granite to rebuild the Causeway, thereby developing the potential for a new green solution to building, which would be eligible for federal funding. I'm saying all this not because I think there's a lot of investigation that would be necessary before we could go down that road, but I think we really have to look at creative solutions to the Causeway problem. And I know we have to address emergency issues immediately, but I think in thinking long-term about the Causeway, we need to understand that there is money available to solve the problem of the Causeway, and we just have to be creative about how we go about applying for those funds.
Thank you, Jim. I guess Alan Kratz, you're in the wings.
Thanks, Jim. Here I am. Yes, thanks. I just wanted to circle back to Linda Nelson's slide. I think it's really very helpful. And is there a way we can have that either circulated or posted somewhere for future reference? It's really good.
Yeah, it will be on the Deer Isle website.
Thanks, Jim.
The three-part slideshow, for what it's worth. Are there any other questions here, comments? So we did reserve up.
Hi, Garrett Aldrich. I'm from Little Deer Isle. I'd just like to add a couple of things. One is in response to what Julie said with fishermen responding. I have talked to Walt Reed about our ferry service, the Idaho Boat Services, to help in an immediate emergency of transporting people from our dock to the mainland. So there is some communication going on between the ambulance corps and Idaho Boat Services. We've done this a lot for the town of Idaho, as that is who we service. So we run into a lot of those emergency issues. I've seen a lot of them over the years and made a lot of emergency trips dealing with the ambulance. So we feel pretty qualified to be able to help in that manner. And also, I would just like to voice my support for what Marsden said. I think if there's a chance that in the process of fixing this problem with the Causeway, to remediate some of the issues that were done way back when, we have to take that chance to go for it. I think that that was it still is a really important area to the fisheries, and maybe anything we can do to help bring that back, it should be tied into this project.
Yep, might actually help get rid of some of that rotten mud smell that you get too. Just
That'd be nice.
inside of-
That would be good.
And back in the corner there, I guess.
So just quickly, I'm Julia Zell, I live in Stonington, but I'm the director at Island Heritage Trust.
Louder.
I live in Stonington, but I'm the director at Island Heritage Trust, and we obviously own some properties right on either side of the causeway. And just want to voice support also, Jim, you know this, I'm sure, what Garrett and Marsden said. If there's I'm sure NOAA will support municipalities, but if there's a role to play for a 501c3 to help funnel funding, especially if there's an positive environmental impact, we certainly want to be involved and help in where we can.
Yeah, Jim. And so I was going to follow up on this comment too, and also for, I think it was Jim on the screen. I'm really interested in hearing what our congressional delegation or Dale might say about the bridging of climate resilience funding and ecological funding with some of the other forms of emergency and infrastructure funding. Is that a compatible merger that we could go after for this, or that you all would facilitate?
So as part of, yes, yes, as part of when we get to a place where we're looking for permits and grants, NOAA will be involved because they'll be one of the resource agencies. Others will be, so we will be looking for that, to cast that broad net. Yeah. If it's applicable based on the engineering and all that. These are all, we're in the middle of Machias Dike. I think everybody's been over Machias Dike at one point or other. Part of that is salmon passage, part of it's ecological restoration, part of it's getting a bridge, because very similar to this, that bridge is, those culverts, they're not a bridge, but they're multiple culverts that are classified as a bridge, have a lot of similar attributes and are probably at a lot more risk of failure than this, just because of their age and their structure. So all of those players are at the table as part of that decision making, and whatever money can be brought to the table. We like to be masters of getting our fair share in Maine, and that's just one of the things we want to do. So any way we can get there, yeah. We do look at those things.
Well, we did want to reserve a few minutes at the end for people speaking for Angus King or Jared Golden or others, if they want to add anything to the conversation.
I'm Christina Green again from Angus King's office. I would just add that these communities and really the whole peninsula, it's so impressive how proactive you're being facing the climate change issues, thinking about this. The federal infrastructure bill is enormous. They're getting it organized, that money will be coming towards the states, and to have this type of preparedness to make your best case to get Maine's share of that money, you're doing absolutely the right thing, and you should all be commended in your efforts. And we're here to support you.
Yeah, I would say the reason we're all here is we recognize the importance of this. And I think, as Dale said, I think the delegation is committed to making sure Maine gets at least its fair share, if not more. This is worthy as project as any of the others. I think the case has been made, and we look forward to supporting however we can as this goes forward.
Well, I don't know, Linda, if you want to say anything to wrap it up, or if we'll just thank everyone for coming.
Yeah, I think it was a great session. Such great questions, right? I don't know if there were any outstanding questions on screen, Jim, but really a lot of great questions, and this is what creates solutions for us. Kind of back to what Julie and Holly said, we create our own solutions, right? So we have to just keep working on this because we've got a lot of change coming our way. So thanks everybody for showing up.
Thank you, and I want to thank Phil Glazer for being our cameraman tonight. Done a good job, Phil. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, my friend.
Wish Linda a happy birthday.
Yeah.